Welcome, Woolies, to the fifth episode of the Woolie Network. I'm your host, Joey Bean, along with my co-host, Ryan Foley. I'm very excited to introduce our guest for today's episode. He's a University of Dayton graduate, a former minor league baseball and college football broadcaster. He's the host of the Sunday Football Show, a writer, and is the play-by-play broadcaster for the Patriots at WBZ 98.5 The Sports Hub. Please welcome the voice of the New England Patriots, Bob Socci. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Well, great to be with you, Ryan. My pleasure. How are you guys doing?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you again. All right, Bob, before we get into any questions, let's just address the elephant in the room. How about the Patriots offseason so far? How about the moves coach made the past week?
Well, they've been spending like they've never spent before, Joey. So there's been a lot of excitement and I think a lot of valid questions being asked about the Patriots' approach. It certainly is a departure from what we're accustomed to, but I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Some of them are market related with the salary cap coming down this year and a number of teams that would usually be on the market looking for free agents this year because of their salary cap situations. They weren't out there spending per usual. And so the Patriots took advantage of really a favorable set of circumstances. They had plenty of cap space. They were in a marketplace with free agents who were available who in past years might not have been. Their teams may have re-signed them, but because of their cap restrictions and limitations, a lot of players became available to the Patriots, like the two tight ends they signed, for example, Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. And then beyond that, though, they had a lot of holes to fill. Let's be realistic about that. This is a team coming off a 7-9 season, certainly very deficient in areas on offense at tight end and wide receiver in particular, and they clearly addressed those two positions. They signed the two tight ends, as I mentioned, plus wide receivers Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar. Some believe they overspent for Aguilar in particular on day one, getting three of those four players, and then Henry was announced that signing the following day, or at least it was reported the following day. So they were very active early, high volume of signings. This is a team that generally lays back on the first day or two of free agency and then signs more of the value type players at bargain rates. There have been exceptions. Stephon Gilmore comes to mind, Darrelle Revis in the recent past. But this year, they were the most aggressive far and away, and really one of the most aggressive teams in the NFL in free agency over the last decade. But they had reasons for that. And I think about the difference a week makes, though, because the previous Friday before free agency, Cam Newton was re-signed by the Patriots. And if you were listening to local sports talk radio, the reaction was generally not favorable. But a week later, the tone has changed considerably, and I think as well the level of excitement and optimism for Patriot fans for the most part. But they still have a question at quarterback, of course, going forward. But nonetheless, they've changed their lineup on offense and defense significantly. They've added probably between a half dozen and maybe even as many as 10 starters, but certainly a lot of contributors in this free agent class.
Yeah, especially like when you're looking at the signing of the two tight ends. Like, how often do you see one team sign two of the top, free agents in that specific position? And especially like what I look at after re-signing Cam to, as of right now, before the draft, Cam's the starter. So, and you look at the success that Cam had during his MVP season, going 15-1. His number one target was Greg Olsen at the tight end position. And, that offense was one of the best in the league that year. So I'm really excited to see, you look at the tight ends that they had last year, and it was, pretty blank. But having the two tight ends this year, I think is definitely something to look forward to on the offense.
Yeah, and the Patriots kind of define the two tight end offense in the NFL. First, remember they got out and drafted players like Ben Watson and Daniel Graham, and then, of course, Aaron Hernandez after Rob Gronkowski, and for a very short time. They were really a combination that was almost unstoppable once they really established themselves in the league after their rookie seasons. And with Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, they're two very complementary pieces because Smith is a guy who can line up in the backfield. Last year, for example, took a toss from the running back position and ran 57 yards against the Houston Texans. What strikes me about both of these guys in particular was their willingness to sign with the Patriots right away, despite what, again, many viewed as a question at quarterback, but also in the case of Henry especially because Jonnu Smith had signed with New England. And rather than being concerned mostly about his individual production and how many targets he's going to get in the coming seasons, he thought the Patriots, in his own words, they reintroduced the tight end And I can compliment Jonnu, and Smith has expressed the same in his introductory press availability with media here in these parts. So I think it's fascinating on a number of different levels that both were willing to come to the Patriots despite the questions with the Pats offense, and that they were both excited about playing with one another. And it underscores again the importance of that position in this offense. And you mentioned Cam Newton. You're right. Greg Olsen was his most reliable target by far. Last year, he didn't have a reliable target at tight end. The Patriots completed only 18 passes to their tight ends. And really, the last 2 years, it's been the most non-productive position group, not only on their offense, but the most non-productive tight end group in the NFL, if you go back to 2019 as well. And I think it's especially striking the lack of success in the red zone in particular. Only one touchdown last year from the tight end spot, and that was in the regular season finale from Devin Asiasi. Well, in Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, you're going to get a lot of red zone opportunities with those two guys in particular.
Yeah, I absolutely think that, like what you said, getting Hunter Henry to come to New England after signing a top tight end the day before, I think that's all trust in Coach Belichick, and definitely something to be excited for as Patriots fans.
Yeah, Joey, these players that we've been hearing from in the first couple of days of press conferences after they signed with the Patriots have all echoed a similar theme. Jalen Mills, for example, the defensive back, was overtaken with excitement when he saw Belichick in the cafeteria. And Hunter Henry's had a relationship with Belichick in some part going back to his high school days in Arkansas. Belichick's very close to his high school coach, Kevin Kelly. Jonnu Smith played for Mike Vrabel and alongside Logan Ryan for several seasons with the Tennessee Titans. And he talked about the culture here and the mentality of the Patriots being consistent with his as a blue-collar kind of guy. And there was some talk in these parts about maybe the Patriots losing their luster after going 7-9 and being less attractive to free agents because of the departure of Tom Brady, of course. But my partner on a Sunday show that I co-host on 98.5 The Sports Hub, Ted Johnson, played in New England. And now Ted didn't part ways with the Patriots on the terms that, so many guys like Patrick Chung, for example, who just retired. Ted doesn't have the close relationship, for example, with Bill Belichick that a lot of his former players have after leaving as Patriots. But nonetheless, what Ted Johnson told me and our audience a couple of weeks ago, I think has rung true during this free agency period. When people were wondering, how can the Pats sell their situation to free agents without Tom Brady coming off 7-9, without a quarterback at the time, and even if it was Cam Newton coming off the kind of season he had, Ted Johnson said, Bill Belichick can sell Bill Belichick. And I think, to your point, that's what the Patriots have done by and large. There is still a lot of cachet for this organization and respect around the league, and also for Cam Newton. We heard from Kendrick Bourne. We heard from the other guys like Henry and Smith who were signed for the Patriots as tight ends and pass catchers. They have a lot of confidence in Cam Newton. And they all mentioned that they watched him play as they were younger when Cam was back in college. So he's a guy that a lot of these players that are coming here looked up to. They're looking forward to trying to play with here in New England in 2021, if indeed he's the quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on every point on the offense and, how the potential they have and how dangerous they can be this coming fall. But personally, during the free agency, the signing of Matthew Judon, I think, is going to be huge. I mean, I can't remember them having a pass rusher specific that was that effective. 2-time Pro Bowler 2 years in a row since probably Chandler Jones, one of my favorites years back. And, it just reminds me of that. And during that, I think those were the height of the Patriots defensive years. So that's really exciting, at least for me as a fan.
Yeah, when I started calling Patriots games in 2013, Chandler Jones was a second-year pro, and he really had a terrific season. And then, of course, was a big part of the Super Bowl winning defense in 2014. And that may be, in fact, the best unit the Patriots have had in my time calling their games. When you think about Darrelle Revis playing at cornerback and people like Dante Hightower, Chandler Jones, Rob Ninkovich up front, among others. And you look at Matthew Judon, he does have the ability to get to the quarterback. But I think he also brings multidimensional skills at that position, which is required in New England. You have to be more than just somebody who tees off and rushes the quarterback, tries to beat tackles. You have to be willing at times to set up teammates with stunts and games up front. Maybe you have to rush to the inside, take on guards on occasion. In the case of Judon, he's going to be asked to set the edge against the run. And he's going to be asked to drop in coverage at times and do other things besides just get after the quarterback. And what we saw the last couple of years, but last year especially, last year certainly, an inability to defend against the run, and in particular on the edges. That's always been a strength of the Belichick teams. In an offense, they try to exploit the middle. On defense, they try to funnel everything into the middle. And last year, they just did not have that ability because of the personnel that they lost from the previous year and maybe guys being asked to do what they were incapable of doing. And they just were unable to stop the run. We saw teams carve through that defense all season long, and it was especially telling late when a team like the Dolphins rushed for 250 yards in Week 15, and that was a team that had cycled through running backs and did not have a very good rushing offense, and yet had its way running at will against the pass. So I think Judon, to your point, brings that ability to rush the passer. He's also young, and that's the thing about this free agent class in particular. A lot of teams spend in free agency and pay for past production. I think what the Patriots have done, and we certainly have confidence, I think, in Belichick's ability as a coach to get the most out of these players. So they've paid for guys that still have many years in their prime remaining. A lot of these players were drafted in 2017, so this is their first turn at the plate in free agency. This is their first opportunity to make big money on the market, and they're still in their mid-20s. And they're still playing motivated for that next contract. Because they're young enough that they figure to be around the league beyond the 2-3 year deals that some of them are getting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's totally the case. And, it's so super exciting. We still have a whole month to wait, a month more until the draft. All the picks they have, I believe they have 10 as of right now. So that's a whole nother conversation that we can have. But I got a whole list of questions here. Let's just get right into them. So I'll take the first one. So there's no question that being the voice of the Patriots sounds like the coolest job in the world. What's the original reason you wanted to become a broadcaster, and when did you realize that?
Joey, I realized that I wanted to be a broadcaster probably at the age of 8, 9, or 10 at the latest. I was playing Little League Baseball in a small town in upstate New York, the middle of upstate New York, in Auburn, New York. And at the time, I just had the bug. I was somebody who practiced announcing in the basement, watching games in my parents' home, in our home. I was someone who did it in the backyard playing wiffle ball and on the fields with my buddies at the playground or even at the Little League complex. And people in my community took note, and we had a really nice complex for Little League Baseball that included a press box and a public address system, along with lights, which enabled the league to stage doubleheaders. So the commissioner of the league tabbed me, knowing that I wanted to be a broadcaster someday, to come up and sit in the press box when I wasn't playing games myself and practice announcing. So there were times when I'd have a 6 o'clock game, and then I'd go upstairs to the press box, and at 7 o'clock or 7:30, I'd sit next to the official scorekeeper, and he would let me announce the batters' names and remind people to return the foul balls to the playing field. And that was the start of it. And it was a lifelong pursuit. It really is a dream. I'm living the dream as the Patriots broadcaster, though I did not grow up as a Pats fan. And baseball was primarily, my most passionate sport as a kid, and really, into the start of my career. You mentioned that I began calling minor league baseball. That's the path I embarked on back in the early 90s. But I'm glad today, I'm very thankful that I wound up being the voice of the Patriots and be able to be a broadcaster for the best organization and the best league in the world, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm sure that almost everybody recognizes your voice, especially from your signature Super Bowl 51 call with Scott Zolak when James White dove into the end zone to win number 5. What is it like traveling with the team every week, being in stadium for divisional matchups, playoff games, and of course the Super Bowl?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked me that today, because this past season we didn't travel with the team due to the COVID pandemic and the conditions, the protocols around the league, and even with our own station's policies. And Scott and mine, my wishes, we decided that it was best to call all the games remotely, as most of, if not all, the NFL radio crews did this year. So we went to Gillette Stadium in the booth and broadcast home games before an empty stadium and broadcast road games off television monitors. And that's when it really struck me how much I missed that experience of being on the road. I've always enjoyed traveling to different cities, different parts of the country, being introduced to places and people I had never experienced before. And being in the NFL, of course, you're staying in nice hotels, you're traveling well with the Patriots, who have their own plane. It's very, not only comfortable, but very convenient travel, because you meet at the stadium, You go through security, not at the airport generally, but at Gillette Stadium. You get on a bus, you go right to the airplane. You take off on a Saturday for a Sunday game. You call the game on Sunday on the road. You leave your broadcast booth, go down under the stadium, get on the bus, go right to the airplane once again, and before you know it, you're home. We could play Buffalo. We could broadcast a game in Buffalo at 1 o'clock, and I can be home to tuck my kids into bed at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night. So it's, again, there are a lot of luxuries that go along with the travel. But for me, the greatest thing, Joey, is being there at the stadium, but also seeing the stadium come to life, whether you're home or away, and just the sense you get, the anticipation and the excitement. I love, for example, when we stay close to a stadium, and there's no better setting for me than the city of Pittsburgh. You have the three rivers that meet right where right where Heinz Field and PNC Park are, the home of the Steelers and the Pirates. And there are times when we go to Pittsburgh and we'll stay in a hotel downtown just across one of those rivers. And we'll walk across a pedestrian bridge to go over to PNC Park and then maybe make one's way over to Heinz Field. And you see people before a 4:25 game on Sunday gathering early. If you walk around downtown to get a cup of coffee in the morning, you see fans starting to come out, and they're all wearing black and gold. And then as you're making your own way to the stadium, you see this stream of black and gold flowing, toward the stadium. There's just tremendous excitement. And I love that part of it. And when we're riding the bus, I love being on the bus and going into a stadium. And just that feeling, that anticipation and excitement that you have, so eager to call the game. And that's, I love every part of my job, and certainly traveling and being around other NFL stadiums and other NFL broadcasters and media is a big part of that.
Absolutely. That's, the exact same feeling that I think most people get, not only going to, Gillette Stadium down for a Patriots game, but any sporting event. I think that's what's great. That's something that we lost this past year, but hopefully it'll get back to normal soon so people can get that feeling.
No question.
Ryan, you got
no
one?
question.
Yeah, so it's a long path to getting to your level of broadcasting. You broadcasted minor league baseball in various places around the country, Navy football games, on your way to landing the job as the voice of the Patriots. This is definitely not a job you just get after you graduate from college. Could you talk about what path for someone interested in broadcasting on the radio or even on TV looks like?
Sure. There are, as many broadcasters as there are. That's how many different stories there are, or how many different paths that were taken to get into the business. Now, for many, it was a much quicker journey, a much shorter journey to their dream jobs of working in the NFL or Major League Baseball or network television, particularly from certain programs, college programs that have a pipeline to bigger markets, or perhaps if one was educated, lived in Boston, for example, and stayed home and went to school in Boston, and then out of college landed a job with one of the local stations. My own path was, as I said, in minor league baseball, because when I was coming out of college at the University of Dayton, I didn't have a lot of experience on air, frankly. Most of my experience was behind the scenes in media relations, helping broadcasters and writers. This was a time before the internet. There were very few opportunities to talk on the radio. Certainly, we didn't have any kind of an audio-visual setup the way you guys do, not when I was in college, let alone high school. So you're very fortunate there. And you're fortunate, of course, to have so many opportunities because of streaming and the internet that didn't exist until I was well into my career. But when I came out of college at the University of Dayton, I parlayed my experience in media relations and landed a couple of internships. And then after those, I got a job with a minor league baseball team and convinced the general manager to allow me for a few innings each home game to broadcast play-by-play. And that's how I got my start in Rochester, New York with the Rochester Red Wings, a AAA team. My broadcast partner was Josh Lewin, who was in his early 20s. Josh has gone on to broadcast for a number of big league teams and in the NFL and worked for Fox for a period of time. And Josh now is the voice of the UCLA Bruins. He's done some fill-in work for the Red Sox in recent years. And I was Josh's partner for 3 innings in a home game. And then I got another job with the minor league baseball team that allowed me to do play-by-play full-time. And then after that job in Peoria, Illinois, I moved to Maryland and got a job with another baseball team. And then while I was working for that team on the eastern shore of Maryland, the Delmarva Shorebirds, I got my foot in the door at the U.S. Naval Academy to broadcast basketball, and eventually football. So it was a long and winding path, and there were a number of other steps along the way. And eventually I moved to Boston in 2008 because my then fiance and soon to be wife was offered her dream job. And we moved here, and I traveled back and forth for 4 or 5 years, and I knocked on doors in the meantime, had a chance to visit with the people who run 98.5 The Sports Hub shortly after the station launched in 2009. I left them some samples of my work on a compact disc. I'm not sure if you guys, when I started, we would record on audio cassettes. Have you ever used an audio cassette player?
No.
I didn't think so. You probably have never seen one. And
I'm sure I have, but yeah.
Well, I started with audio cassettes, and then I worked my way up to compact discs. So I left a CD with the program director at 98.5 The Sports Hub, and a few years later, when Gil Santos retired, they reached out to me. They liked the work that I left with them, and they wanted to hear more of it. And that led to an interview and ultimately being hired. So my path was very long and winding, and a lot of steps in between where I started and where I am today. There are other people, for example, who go to college in the Boston area, or you don't have to go to college in Boston. You can go to Ithaca College in New York or any other school across the country and become interns for stations like ours, or they get a job at 98.5 The Sports Hub or WEEI or one of the television stations, NBC Sports Boston or Nesson, as interns during their college careers or just out of college. And then they are able maybe to take advantage of those opportunities, get some more experience, and find themselves eventually working their way on air. But again, everybody has a different story. I think of the broadcasters that I work with at 98.5 The Sports Hub, we call play-by-play. I think in the case of Sean Grandy, he went to college at Boston University, so he's been in this area for a long time, going back to his college career. Judd Surratt, the voice of the Bruins, has a much different background. Judd is from the Midwest and came to Boston from Chicago. So he kind of cut his teeth in the Midwest, whereas Sean, coming out of college, of course, was somebody who started in the Northeast, and I was somebody who kind of bounced around all over and took a lot longer to get to this level for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very interesting to hear. So I'll go in for you. So being a broadcaster, reporter, radio host, etc., all these jobs require you to be active in media outlets, writing blogs, articles for the website, social media, guest appearance on different radio shows. Can you talk about the importance of being able to do so many different things and have different skills?
Well, especially today, it's even more important than it was when I started, and certainly in the middle of my career, particularly because as opportunities have increased remarkably in many respects, the numbers of people who are taking advantage of those opportunities or be given the chance to broadcast is becoming smaller. For example, minor league baseball has certainly gone through a period of contraction in recent years. So a lot of people, when I started out, were broadcasting games with ball clubs that no longer are part of minor league baseball. So they're missing out on those opportunities. But you have to wear a lot of hats wherever you are. That's number one. I think you have to be willing to do whatever it takes once you get an opportunity with a station or a team while you're in college. If it means doing some work behind the scenes for a station, you take that with your hand raised and an eager and enthusiastic attitude. When it comes to writing and the skills that are required to communicate, they really carry over from one discipline to another. And it's very important to be well-rounded because of particularly today, the abundance of digital media. When I started, again, it was pre-internet. So it was radio or television. Well, today there are so many different niche programming avenues for people. It could be streaming networks. It could be what your high school produces on the internet, a YouTube channel, a podcast you might host. You can produce your own podcast today and put it out there on the internet. It could be a blog that you write. And so you have to be able to do a lot of different things. People want value and they want versatility when it comes to the individuals they hire. So for example, in our field nowadays, whereas before maybe you only really needed to describe the play-by-play when the games were being played and then you weren't heard from for the rest of the year. Well, now you're expected to maybe write on a regular basis for a station's website. You're expected to go out and make appearances in the community and expected to have a presence online with social media. I think writing is invaluable, whether you write a blog or whether you write for a printed publication or you're published in a book form. Writing is invaluable, I think, in being a good broadcaster, and you have to develop your writing skills. So I think that's a priority, even if that's not a particular aspiration for anyone. But to your question again, you really have to do a lot of different things in this day and age, because again, there's so many people that want the jobs that are available in the media. And we've seen, for example, the newspaper industry shrink because of the reality of how difficult it is for newspapers to make money, be profitable, when there's so much free news available to anyone at their beck and call. People can, watch the news when they want to. They can read the news on their phone whenever they want to. They don't have to go through an entire paper. They don't have to have it delivered to their house. They get to pick and choose. They are their own gatekeepers in this day and age. And so, for people that get into this business, I think you have to be able to, not just be a traditional newspaper reporter, but you'll hear it from those in the business. You have to be able to, communicate on Twitter and report and know the nuances and have the keys to social media and attract the following and an audience. You have to be able to be fluent in interview settings, and you have to be able to, in many cases, be able to do things on video. You see, like, if you watch the Patriots, or if you look at the Patriots newspaper reporters, not only are the beat writers for the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald, for example, writing for their daily papers, but they're doing podcasts. They're reporting with web reports in front of cameras. They're setting up those cameras and getting the microphones out, and they're becoming their own producers, when they cover the team during the season, day after day. There's a lot of competition out there, and I think you have to be well versed in all the different disciplines that are part of the media field.
Wow, yeah, that's very interesting to hear. Definitely, I think that's definitely the case throughout all media. So, Ryan, you got one?
Yeah. So, what is one piece of advice that you would give to a high school or college student that is interested in getting into broadcasting with aspirations of calling professional league games?
Sure, Ryan. I think whatever route you take, and I talked about
Yeah.
the different paths that people have been on. You can look at network stars like Joe Buck in his early 20s. He was a network broadcaster. Bob Costas, same kind of story. Came out of Syracuse, and before long, he was working in St. Louis, and the next thing you know, he's a network star. And then there are other people like myself that grind away, and it takes a long, long time. And, we don't become network television broadcasters, but become local radio announcers for teams. And whether you're a Division III college announcer, whether you're calling American Legion baseball or you're calling Major League Baseball, I think when you get into this business, or when you aspire to be in this business, coming out of high school, for example, the most important rules are this. And I think they're rules that I still try to live by today. One, be open to constructive criticism and welcome feedback. I reach out, and when I was younger, I reached out to a lot of people that I admired and respected in our business. And I wanted them to give me their career advice, just as you guys are, in a way, asking me to do today. And I was open as well. Once I got into the business and started broadcasting, or when I first made my audio cassettes, talking to myself while sitting in the stands at baseball games, long before anybody ever hired me to call a game, I would send some of those tapes out to people that I respected. I valued their opinions, and I wanted constructive criticism. I wanted to improve, and I wanted to be better. So always be of the mind that you want to improve. It's always about the craft and making yourself better, self-improvement, whatever you do. I think as well, you have to seek as much experience as you can. Now, today I'm in a position where I call the Patriots games, and I have a number of other things, as Joey pointed out, that are related to my position. But when I was in college, coming out of school, I took whatever job I could get. I worked in a newspaper office reporting high school football scores while I was working in the college athletic department, and did some work for the student radio station. When I got a job in minor league baseball and I was broadcasting baseball games, I tried to get on the air for high school basketball. I did whatever I could to get more experience. Repetition is such an important part of improvement in our business, and becoming confident and finding your own voice. So I think those are the big things for me. Be open and willing to inquire, write, contact people that you admire in the business, especially when you go off to college, and be open to the constructive criticism, and turn their feedback into positives to make yourself better. And the other part of it is try to get as much experience as you can. Now, all that being said, I think what's most important overall, whether you stick with broadcasting or not, is to have a well-rounded education and a well-rounded view of the world. If you look at the best broadcasters, and I'm not putting myself in this mix, and whether it's locally or nationally, they're people that have a perspective that extends well beyond sports. They've, for lack of a better term at my disposal right now, they've broad horizons. And get a good education. Don't limit yourself to just communications and journalism. You can major in anything and be a broadcaster. Some of the best majored in anything but broadcasting. Some were lawyers. Some had started out in other fields. I think Dan Schulman is an outstanding broadcaster for ESPN and now works for the Toronto Blue Jays. I think he worked in the insurance field coming out of college in Canada. So there's a lot of different ways to go when you get out of college. But the most important thing for me is to be well educated, read a lot, write a lot, be more than just someone who can recite statistics and explain the ground rules on a one hop line drive that bounces over the wall in left field at Fenway Park. Be somebody who can talk about things other than sports. To me, the broadcasters that I admire the most, they call the games, and while they're describing the events on the field, they always are cognizant of the fact that those are people playing those games. And be mindful. You have to be a good storyteller. So be mindful that you're telling stories ultimately about people playing games.
Yeah, so you're touching up on the history of broadcasting and just brings to mind, who were some of your motivational broadcasters that you look up to as you're going up the ranks? Like, who were some of the names that you just, modeled your play-by-play style with?
Yeah, when you start out, you tend to, I don't want to say imitate, but you tend to almost subconsciously, subliminally mimic the broadcasters that you grew up listening to. I think it's only natural. And it does take time to find your own voice. And you want to strive to be your own broadcaster. You don't want to copy anybody else. But when I started, I was a New York Mets fan. And Bob Murphy was the voice of the Mets in my youth. So when I called baseball, I'd have this twang like Bob Murphy had. And it was unnatural for me. It didn't sound like my voice. It was me trying to sound like him. And over the course of time, hopefully, I have overcome that. But my broadcasting heroes or role models, if you were people as a young kid, like Vin Scully, the legendary baseball announcer. Bob Costas, as I got a little bit older, was somebody I admired greatly, and eventually was able to develop a bit of a relationship with when I was in Peoria calling games in the Midwest League, and Bob was based in St. Louis at the time. And a number of other announcers have become very influential in my career. But I always admired the great broadcasters, voices like Kurt Gowdy, who of course had a strong presence in New England as the voice of the Red Sox and for a short time voice of the Patriots. He was a voice when I listened to him as a kid, right away, this is a big game. But there's so many, honestly, Joey, today that I'd be remiss if I tried to start naming a few of them, because I'd leave some of the most important people and biggest influences in my life and career out unintentionally. I think for me, like I say, the Scullys of Doc Emmerich. Mike Emmerich is a hockey announcer that I have great admiration for, tremendous respect for. A lot of broadcasters that I really admire the most, maybe people in these parts aren't aware of. Local broadcasters who were great radio play-by-play men. People who had an influence on me as well individually because of those connections I referred to that I made when I reached out and wrote letters and sent emails to broadcasters asking them to review my work or at least to offer their advice. But I'd say when I was a kid, for the most part, it was the likes of a Scully or a Gowdy. Watched the Game of the Week on NBC religiously. So Joe Garagiola and Tony Kubek were two voices of my childhood, many, many others as well. Well, Bob Costas was probably the first all-around, well-versed, versatile broadcaster that I looked at and said, that's somebody I'd like to be like, because I had so much respect for just his intelligence on the air and his ability to transcend the events he covered. Not necessarily as a play-by-play guy, because I think there are a lot better play-by-play men out there, and even in his time. But nonetheless, I had a lot of respect for him as a young professional getting into the business, and he had a great influence on me at that time.
Absolutely, Bob Costas, one of the best. That's coming from me. I haven't, you know, never seen him call any live, but just like the character as himself, and you know, his legend lives on for sure. Ryan, you got one?
You know, Ryan, before you ask, I'll tell you right now, I mean, like Gil Santos was a voice and a person that I had a lot of respect for. When I first moved to Boston, even while I was calling Navy games in 2008, I wrote to Gil and asked him to listen to my work, and he gave me a response
Really?
that really gave me tremendous confidence. Gil had some things to nitpick as well as compliment me on. So there were some criticisms there that helped, but it was a tremendous boost to my confidence, particularly when a few years later I was suddenly a candidate for his position. That made me believe really that I could do what he did, not necessarily at that level, because he is the voice of the Patriots. He's a Hall of Famer for the Patriots and one of the all-time best. But what a classic radio voice, and
Oh,
perfect for football, huh?
yeah, New England legend right there.
Absolutely. Joe Castiglione has been another guy that was very generous with his time through the years, and somebody that I admire because of his long career and his approach. A wonderful guy. There was a time when Jerry Trupiani was calling the Red Sox, and he was willing to lend an ear to my work. So there are some local people that had a big influence. When I was a kid, I listened and watched a lot of Red Sox games on WSBK TV 38. So I was a fan of Ned Martin calling games with Bob Montgomery and Fred Cusick and John Pearson working the Bruins games on WSBK.
Definitely. Ryan, you got one?
Yeah. So if someone wants to get into broadcasting but doesn't want to be on air, what are some other jobs we may not know about?
Oh, there's so many wonderful jobs in broadcasting and in the radio business. These are the people who are invaluable. It starts with the people that are in production. In some cases, that means technical production. The guys and the women who make the commercials that you hear, who put together the montages of highlights or sound bites that welcome you back from a commercial break when your favorite radio show begins again. Those are individuals that I know at our station are invaluable. And then there are the people that produce the shows themselves. They're not only technically savvy, and they not only drive those shows in a sense behind the wheel, but they often are the most creative people and the biggest driving forces when it comes to the conception of a show and what you're going to talk about every day. They do a lot of the research and the legwork for what you hear from the co-hosts. Certainly there are a lot of jobs like that in the business and television and radio, but those are just a couple that come to mind in that one specific area. There's sales and broadcasting, people that sell the commercial time that allow us to do what we do and to be paid for it, that play a huge role, obviously, in our station. In some cases, it's a little bit of everything. There are some people that are on the air and then do some of the producing for the shows, maybe put together their own packages when it comes to Hardy from the Zolak and Bertrand show, or Jim Murray, who's a pivotal part of Felger and Maserati on 98.5 of the Sports Hub. Those are two guys that people know as on-air personalities. And in the case of Hardy, he's giving headlines. Same with Jim. But they're often these comic geniuses who are putting together comic bits with, in Hardy's case, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Fuppets, or The Last Word, where he spends time, in his own studio at home or at the studio at the station, and pieces together sound bites and clips from a week's worth of shows and puts them together for the end of the week on Friday, and it's hilarious. And those are the people that I think make the station what it is and make 98.5 the Sports Hub, my company, my station, the most successful sports radio station not only in New England but really probably across the country. So there are a lot of different things you can do in the broadcasting business. A lot of jobs are available in broadcasting. It's good to have experience, frankly, in all of them if you can, or as many of them as you can, being able to edit. There's technology today that enables you to edit on your home computer what years ago you'd have to do laboriously in a studio. So you have a lot of opportunities at your age, Ryan, and your age, Joey, today. If you want to get into this business, where you can get some experience in front of the camera like you're doing now and behind the microphone asking questions, but also be able to edit and to be able to write and produce and put together the concept of a show, just as it seemed you both have done in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great to hear. Definitely interesting for most people. Not necessarily like you said, wanting to get into the program, but not getting that on face or on microphone connection. So I got the last question for you here. So what would you say makes one candidate stand out from the others when it comes to for applying jobs in media?
Well, I think that there are consistent factors in any field. It begins with character, it begins with integrity, it begins with personality. And by that, I don't mean a contrived personality or try to be someone you're not, but being sincere, being genuine, having a good work ethic, being a person that others can connect with. All jobs, it seems to me, in my field, my experience, have come down to a couple of different things. And what kind of relationship do you have with the decision maker? Does that person like you as a person first and foremost before giving you the opportunity? Do you have the work ethic along with the skills to make an organization better? And so I think, whether you want to get into broadcasting or you want to go into another field, those are the things that people look for in general, and the type of attributes that are going to help you down the road. Certainly there is a certain skill set or certain level of ability that people want to hear and see in your work, particularly as you move up the ladder. Those expectations become a lot higher. But for the most part, I think, there's so many very talented people in our business and so many individuals who want to get into this business across the spectrum of sports and across the spectrum of broadcasting, that the most important things, I think, for you to set yourself apart is to be someone who is going to make an organization better, not only because of the on-air work, but what you can bring to that organization off there. What kind of person are you? Are you someone who's going to be an ambassador away from the workplace? Are you going to be someone who's going to be involved in the community? Are you going to be somebody who isn't going to, cause a headache to your boss? It's a business with a lot of egos, and I think that from my standpoint, one of the things I always try to do is not be heard from except on game days. If I'm not knocking on the door of the boss, he doesn't have to worry about me every other day of the week. Then I think I'm probably going to continue to be in good stead. But set the ego aside. Be a team player. Be someone who's unselfish. Be someone who has integrity and honesty. And again, the desire, as I said earlier, try to improve the craft always. Always look to be better. Always look to improve. It's not just about climbing the ladder and finding the next job. I think some people lose sight of how you get that next job, and it begins with doing a good job where you are.
Awesome. Yeah, that was great. Great answers. Hope those questions were good, but I know that definitely the viewers watching, they're going to appreciate those answers for sure.
That was some great stuff. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You guys, great stuff on your part too. You guys are well prepared, and I'm really enjoying the opportunity to talk to both of you.
All right, Bob. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you once again for coming back on, and have a good one. Appreciate it.
Joey, Ryan, all the best to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob. Have a good one.
Take care.